came out with this tool called FireProx. We released it a couple of weeks ago now at B-Sides Orlando. And then the idea behind FireProx was I was informed from Ralph May, a friend of ours, that if you used AWS API Gateway, that it would actually rotate the IP with every request. After some dialogue after the tool came out, I learned that this actually was old. In 2016, some people came out with the tool and released it at Black Hat Arsenal as a portion of their tool set. It just didn't get any headlines, but it's a really fascinating technique. So it's using the AWS API Gateway, and what you're doing is you're basically setting up an HTTP pass-through proxy. And so if you're familiar with like the HTTP protocol, you'll know the gets, and you have posts, and you have heads, and you have options, and all these different methods. This does basically any of them. So you can set up any to any. And what you do is you spin up this API Gateway proxy, you point it at a URL destination, and it just has to be, doesn't have to have the full URI. It could just be www.companydomain.com. The entire URI on the end of that, so all the file names or the directories, all the post parameters, all the headers, they get sent directly to that destination. And when it makes the web request, it's actually using another IP address with every request. So let's say that you sent 1,000 different web requests, it's going to rotate them. Now there is, depending on the region, there is a finite number of IP addresses somewhere. But if you use like US East 1 or US East 2, I rarely run into a duplicate. And if I do, it's like minutes or hours later, and it just so happened to be like coincidental. But it's a really cool technique. And so FireProx basically spins up a URL, and it provides you with the proxy URL for the API gateway. And then you could scrape, or you could do password sprays, or you could crawl and use some of those tools. The other cool thing is if they're using CAPTCHAs or WAFs or any sort of detection capability on the IP, a lot of times you'll see some of these more sophisticated infrastructure where their security teams are basically looking across all of their IP space and then correlating them back to the IP request. So if you make a web request and then you also try to authenticate and then you also hit some mobile app endpoint or some MDM endpoint, then they're able to say, hey, wow, this is weird. This IP address is touching multiple different IP addresses, let's just blacklist it. Or they get smarter and they say they might be using a proxy, so let's monitor for the X-forwarded4 header. This originally, when we released it, we had this problem, and so we put out a $100 bounty for the first person that could find a bypass for it. And Fred Reamer actually came out with it within a couple hours. And what he did was he overwrote the X-forwarded4 in the API gateway. And so you could basically spoof the X-forwarded4 by passing in your own custom my X-forwarded4 header, and it would automatically reroute it. And it was super fascinating. So with that, I have a little demo here.
Ready just in case. Okay, we do not need the poll, by the way. By the way, I like the fact that you're using fish. That's awesome.
Yes, fish is amazing. So in the top screen, I have FireProx. In the bottom screen, I spun up a web server. It's basically just a custom domain. It's bhiswebcast.ezrareport.com or something. So what we're going to do here, before we start it, because it goes kind of quick, I'm going to launch a custom web server written in Python on the bottom screen. All it's going to be doing is listening for web requests. It's going to be printing the request as it comes in. And I also print the X-forwarded4 below it, so you can kind of get an idea for it. And then in the top screen, FireProx is going to run, and we're going to kind of walk through a few of the different techniques that FireProx does on creating new ones, deleting them, and listing them out. And so I'm launching Python hacks.py. I'll show you a copy of what that code really is. It's super lightweight, but basically all it really does is it spins up a listener on, it binds to 0.0.0.0, which is on the external interface on port 80, and then it makes the web request, it prints it out, and then it prints the X-forwarded4 is basically all it does. And then FireProx, we run fire.py and just by itself, and you'll see it can take an access key, secret access key, you could use sessions. We had another pull request for profiles, so you could use AWS profiles. And then there's a number of different commands: list, create, delete, and update. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spin up a create URL and point it at the bhiswebcast.ezrareport.com URL, which is the one running on the bottom. And AWS API Gateway is going to give us back this long URL that has some custom, basically a custom Amazon URL. So anytime we make a web request to that URL, it's actually going to be sent to our web server, which is on BHIS Web. So I have this brute.py file that I wrote really quickly that does exactly what Bo was talking about earlier. It reads in a word list, and then it just attempts to concatenate the URL with that file and check for the results. It just loops through. You'll also notice I'm passing in the xmyexported4, and I'm spoofing localhost as who actually made the web request. So if their SIM is up there running, it's going to see a bunch of 127.0.01 requests. And if you look on the far left on the bottom, this is just going through and enumerating it, and the IP address is changing with every web request, and you'll see the exported for is 127.0.0.1. And this could technically be anything, right? You could take, I'm gonna pause this real quick. You could see on the far right the get, it's get/2004, get 2001. It's enumerating all of these, looking for these files in there, and it's making a unique IP address request with each one. So if they are blocking on the IP address, then they're just blocking a bunch of AWS API IPs, which technically would be a lot of them. So I don't think they would. It's only making one web request, so they're probably not going to block on one. If they're blocking on exported for, which we've seen before with like fail to ban and some of these other tools that have plugins for blocking exported for, they're going to block 127.0.0.1, which is localhost. Or we could have set this up for the actual web server. We could have did it for Cloudflare IP addresses. We could have made it random, so it's randomized as well. But this is just a simple little demo kind of showing how each of the IP address change. So I just canceled the FireProx brute up top. And if you do,
quick question. Oh, wait. Somebody just said how much the API costs. What it costs for the API key to do this?
So it's super cheap. I did some math. I think it was like 1 million requests with an average. I forget what it exactly was. I think it was like 20K payload size for 1 million requests a month, and it was like dollars. It's very cheap.
Hey Mike, didn't Dakota just have like a $400 bill or something for something?
Yeah. So Dakota rolled this into his scraper,
which means I'm going to have a $400 bill.
So yeah, Dakota rolled it into his scraper, and because he's a data connoisseur like me, we collect data.
Connoisseur. So you guys with like wine glasses. What did you get that? Well, that's fantastic. That's a vintage 2019.
Sadie smells bad.
I'm not a connoisseur.
So, but his payload sizes were massive because he was downloading these big chunks of JSON, and so it spiked it up. And the other thing was he let control of it, so he just let it ride, and he forgot about it and came back and was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a bad thing." So it's relatively cheap if you keep it down, especially for scraping or web stuff like that. So to continue the demo, I'm just going to list out the ones that are here. I pass in the command list, and you'll see it's right there. You'll notice the H0029ILRDK. That's the API ID that Amazon has. So if you want to delete it, you just pass in command delete API ID, and then pass in that, and it'll delete it for you. It's weird though. They do rate limit you on how many you can delete. I'm not really sure why.
They restrict that.
They restrict that, but you could spin up a bunch of them. So that's pretty much the demo.